trying to learn Blender on your own can often be overwhelming. But don't worry, in this tutorial I'll guide you through the process of creating your very first character in Blender. Okay, let's dive in. My name is Eve, I'm a 3D artist and illustrator, and today I'm teaming up with School of Motion to bring you this video, which is an introduction to modeling and texturing in Blender. In this tutorial, we'll cover the basics of Blender's interface, as well as its modeling and texturing tools. By the end of the tutorial, you'll learn how to make your own little character, even if you've never touched Blender before. Okay, let's get started. First, let's open up Blender. Before we start modeling, you need to turn on a few add-ons that are off by default. Go to Edit, Preferences. Then go into Key Map. Key Map is where you change your interface preferences. Here, turn on Tab for Pie Menu, as well as Extra Shading Pie Menu items. This will allow you to access the different object editing modes very quickly by pressing Tab. Then in the Input tab here, turn on Emulate 3-button mouse. Finally, in Add-ons, search for Add Mesh Extra Objects and Mesh Loop Tools. Add Mesh Extra Objects gives you more primitives to work with, so it gives you a round cube that we'll be using in this tutorial. And Mesh Loop Tools is also a very useful add-on. These modeling tools will help speed up your workflow. After that, click here and save preferences. These preferences will make your workflow faster and more streamlined. Next, let's run through some navigation basics. If you're not a beginner, feel free to skip this part. In Blender, to rotate around your object, you use the middle mouse button. You zoom in and out with the wheel of your mouse. If you press Shift middle mouse button, you can pan around your scene. Now I'll just quickly show you some shortcuts that you need to get started. You press G to grab your object and move it around your scene. You press S and drag your mouse to scale your object up and down. You press R to rotate your object. Okay, that's enough navigation basics for now. I'll show you everything else you need to know as we're making the character. Let's start working on the character. First, let's import the reference. I have supplied this in the description, so make sure to download it from there. To import the reference, press Shift A and select Image Reference. Find where the file is, unclick Align to View, and then press Load Reference Image. Now you want to rotate it. Press R to rotate and then press X to constrain the rotation only to the X-axis. After that, type in 90 on your keyboard. That rotates the image 90 degrees in the X-axis. Move the reference up by pressing G and Z. Now select the image and go down here. Now set the image depth to front from this button. This allows us to see the image in front of the mesh, which will make matching the proportions while modeling easier. Next, let's reduce the opacity of the reference and position it so we can see it while modeling. Enable opacity and reduce it to 0.08. Nice, now let's start modeling our apple character. First, we'll add a round cube and make that into the shape of the apple. Press Shift A and from Mesh, add a round cube. If you don't have that option available, make sure that you've turned on Add Mesh Extra Objects from Properties like I showed you in the beginning. Once you've added the cube, click on this menu on the left here. In Radius, put in 1. That makes the round cube actually round. After that, right-click and choose Shade Smooth. That makes the normals on the round cube smooth. Now let's position this properly. Press G and Z to move the cube up. Press S to scale it up so the scale matches the reference. Now press S and Z to scale down the cube only in the Z axis. That makes it a bit elongated like in the reference. Now let's start editing the shape of the cube. We do this in Edit mode. Press Tab and choose Edit mode. Here we can adjust the shape of the round cube by pushing and pulling vertices, edges, and faces around. In Edit mode, you press 1 for vertice selection. You can move individual vertices here with G. When you press 2 while in edit mode, you enter edge selection mode. Here you can move individual edges with G, rotate them with R, and scale them with S. When you press free, you enter face selection mode. Here you can grab faces and move them and rotate them and scale them with the same shortcuts. Okay, now let's make the holes for the eyes. While still in edit mode, press free for face selection. Hold down Shift and click on these faces to select them. After this, press X and choose Faces to delete the selected faces. Nice, now we have the holes for the eyes. Now let's shape one of these eyes. Press 1 for vertice selection. If you select this end vertex here and press G, you can move it freely like this. That's not exactly what we want. We want it to slide along the surface of the model so it doesn't distort the shape. To do that, you can press G twice. That way, the vertex slides along the existing curvature we already have. Move all of the eye vertices around the same way by pressing G twice. Try to match the size of the opening to the size of the eyes on the reference. Next up, we're going to delete one half of this cube and then mirror it over to the other side so we don't have to keep working on both sides. To do that, press free for face selection. Turn on X-ray from this button here. This allows you to select faces on the front as well as the back of the mesh. Now drag your mouse over these faces. With all of the faces selected, press X and choose Faces to delete them. Now you can turn off X-ray from here. Next, let's mirror this half to the other side. Press Tab and go into Object mode. Click on this little wrench tool here to go into Modifier Properties. Here from the Add Modifier menu, add the Mirror modifier. That mirrors the mesh over, so what you do on one side now will be mirrored over to the other. That saves us a lot of time. Here in the mirror modifier, make sure that clipping is turned on so you don't have any unwelded gaps in your model. Now when you press Tab and go into edit mode and adjust anything on one side of the model, it will get reflected on the other side. Okay, now press 1 for vertice selection. Here I continue adjusting the shape of the eye opening by pressing G twice to slide the vertices along the surface of the model. Once you get the eye openings to this shape, we can apply a modifier to smooth our mesh and make the holes of the eyes rounder. To do that, go into Modifier Properties here. After that, click on Add Modifier and choose the Subdivision Surface modifier. That subdivides our mesh and makes the holes around the eyes rounder. At the moment, this modifier is just a preview in the viewport, so it hasn't actually been applied to our mesh. When you press Tab and go into Edit mode, you can see this. You can see that the topology of the model is the same as it was before. Only after you apply this modifier will the mesh be actually subdivided. This is actually quite helpful because you can still adjust the shape of the mesh easily with less vertices while previewing what the mesh will look like once it's subdivided. Okay, here I'm in edit mode and I'm just scaling the opening of the eye up a bit more and adjusting the shape of the eye further. I also grabbed these middle vertices here between the eyes and I moved them in with G and Y. That gives the face a nice curve. Next, let's make the indent on top of the head. Select this vertex on the top here. After that, turn on Proportional Editing from this button. Proportional editing allows you to have a smooth fall off once you move a vertex. So if you press G now, you can see what I mean. When I move this vertex, the vertices around it move as well. You can scroll up or down to increase or decrease the area the proportional editing affects. So I scrolled down on my mouse to decrease it. After I decrease the size of proportional editing, I press G and Z to move the vertices down. This gives us a nice dent in the middle of the head. Next, I turn on X-ray from up here and move some vertices around to more closely match the shapes from the reference. After this, you can turn off X-ray from the same button. By the way, you can hide and unhide your reference by pressing on this eye icon next to the object. While moving vertices around, you also want to make sure that your edges aren't too messy. Generally, you want to try and keep everything as straight as you can. So here we don't want the edges to be wonky. To fix that quickly, I press 2 for edge selection. I then double click to select the whole loop and press S, Z and 0 to straighten the edges in the Z axis. I do that all over the model so everything is nice and tidy. So if you see some edges that are a bit uneven, just try and straighten them. When you're done, press Tab and go into Object Mode. Nice, now we're done with the base shape. We can now apply the modifiers. Go into Modifier Properties and from the tick mark next to Modifiers, choose Apply. This applies the mirror and subdivision surface so they're no longer just previews in the viewport. If I press Tab and go into Edit Mode, you can see that the mesh has actually been mirrored over and it's also been subdivided. So now we have more polygons to work with. Now let's insert the edges around the eyes. Press 2 for edge selection. Double click to select the edge loop around one of the eyes. Press E to extrude the loop. Press S to scale down the newly extruded edge inwards. In the box here, I put in 0.9 for X, Y, and Z. Making these circular loops around your character's eyes is good practice. This is because it gives you good deformations once your character is rigged and animated. Ideally, you want your eye loops to look a little something like this. But since we're doing a very simple character, this will be good for now. Let's insert the edge on the other eye as well. Double click to select the eye loop. Press E to extrude it and S to scale it inwards. I put in a value of 0.9 in these boxes so I can match the scaling on the other side. Nice, now that we're done with the head, let's insert the eyeballs. Press Tab and go into Object Mode. Press Shift A and add another round cube. Right click it and choose Shade Smooth. Scale it down with S and position it inside of the head with G. Here you want to make sure it doesn't clip the head. Once you're happy with the positioning, you want to mirror the eye over to the other side. First though, press Ctrl A and choose All Transforms. What that does is it resets all transforms and brings your origin point of the object back to the center of the scene. Now when you mirror over, the object will mirror correctly from the center of the scene. Now select the eyeball and from Modifier Properties, add the Mirror modifier. Unchecking Merge here ensures that your objects remain separate. Nice, now let's extrude the eye opening inwards to make the lash line. Select the head and press Tab to go into Edit Mode. Press 2 for edge selection, then Shift and double click to select the opening of both eyes. Press E and Y to extrude the lash line. Okay, now press Tab and go into Object Mode. Add a Subdivision Surface modifier to the head and the eyes so they appear a bit smoother. Okay, that's the head all done now. Next, let's add the stem, the leaves, and the little worm friend coming out of the apple. Let's start with the stem first. Press Shift A and add a cube. Scale it down with S and position it here with G. Scale it up in the Z axis by pressing S and Z. Rotate it with R. Now press Tab and go into Edit Mode. Press 3 for face selection. Select the top face here and scale it up with S. Now press Tab and go into Object Mode. Let's apply a Subdivision Surface modifier to this object. Go into Modifier Properties here and add a Subdivision Surface modifier. Now press Tab and go into Edit Mode. Press Ctrl R and add some loops to the ends of the stem on the top and on the bottom. That hardens those areas up. Nice! Now press Tab and go into Object Mode. Let's apply the Subdivision Surface modifier. In Modifier Properties, click on this tick mark here and then choose Apply. That applies the subdivision surface. After that, right-click and choose Shade Smooth. Nice, the stem looks good now. Next, let's make the leaves. Press Shift A and add another cube. Position it by pressing G. Scale it down with S and make it thinner by pressing S and Y. Scale it up in the Z-axis by pressing S and Z. Now press Tab and go into Edit mode. Press Ctrl R and add an edge loop to the middle of the cube. Next, turn on X-ray from here and then press 1 for vertice selection. Select the top and bottom vertices. Scale them in by pressing S and X. Now press 2 for edge selection. Double-click to select the middle edge. Press Ctrl B to bevel it. Move your mouse to bevel. While beveling, scroll on your mouse to increase the number of cuts on the bevel. Now press Tab and go into Object mode. Add a Subdivision Surface modifier to the leaf as well. Then right-click it and choose Shade Smooth. That makes it look better. Next, press Tab and go into Edit mode. Press Ctrl R and add an edge down the middle here. We'll move this middle edge out later to add a bit of a curve to the leaf. Now press Tab and go into Object mode. Position the leaf on the stem with G. Scale it down with S and rotate it with R. Once you're happy with the position and while you're in Object mode, press Shift D to duplicate the leaf. Rotate it to the other side with R and scale it down with S. Now let's add a bit of a curve to both of the leaves. Select this one. Press Tab and go into Edit mode. Press 2 for edge selection. Double-click to select the middle edge here. After that, turn on Proportional Editing from this button here, and then move the edge back with G and Y. As a reminder, here you can scroll up or down on your mouse to increase or decrease the area that proportional editing affects. Okay, that made a nice curve down the middle of the leaf. Do the exact same for the other leaf. Next, let's make the worm coming out of the apple. Press Shift A and add a cube. Scale it down with S and position it where the worm begins on the reference with G. After that, press Tab and go into Edit mode. Press 3 for face selection and select the top face of the cube here. After that, click and hold down on the Extrude tool here. Choose Extrude to Cursor. Extrude to Cursor allows you to extrude to wherever you click in the viewport. Let me show you. Press numpad 1 for front view. Click like this a few times and follow the curve of the worm on the reference. This extrude tool is really handy for curved objects like rope, wires, or anything similar that you might need. Nice, now let's subdivide the worm. Press Tab and go into Object mode. From Modifier Properties, add a Subdivision Surface modifier. Apply it from the tick mark next to the modifier name. After that, right-click the object and choose Shade Smooth. Move the worm down a bit with G and Z. Here, we also want to make the worm a bit thicker. To make it thicker, press Tab and go into Edit mode. Select all the faces by pressing A. After that, press Alt S to scale everything along the normals. Nice, that's the worm all done. Last thing left to model is the plane for the mouth. So for characters, usually you have two options here. You can model the inside of the mouth and make it as actual geometry, or you can put a plane in front and then put a texture on top of that plane. We're going with option 2 today, where we just have a plane with a texture on it. Having the mouth as a separate plane makes it easier to swap out the 2D textures if you want to animate your character talking. To easily make a plane that follows the curve of the face, let's just make a duplicate of the head. To do that, while in object mode, select the head and press Shift D to duplicate it. Now press Slash to isolate the duplicated object. Press Tab and go into edit mode. Press Free for face selection. Shift select these faces here. After that, go into Select, Invert. That inverts your selection. Now press X and choose Faces to delete the selected faces. That leaves us with just a plane that follows the curvature of the head. Press Slash again to exit isolation mode. Here you can move the plane a bit forward with G and Y so it doesn't clip anything. And that's it, we're all done with modeling now. Next up, I'll show you how to add color to the model through materials, and I'll explain how UVs work in Blender. If you're finding this video useful so far, make sure to check out my YouTube channel, Eve Sculpts, and my Patreon where I share more 3D tutorials. On my Patreon, I also share behind the scenes of my animation project, The Magical Adventures of Gizmo and Oz. Anyway, let's get back to the video now. Now let's apply some materials to our model to give it some color. We'll do a separate material for each color. A material is what drives how your object will look, so it defines its colors, how reflective it is, how rough it is, and lots of other properties. Okay, let's add a material for the red of the apple first. In object mode, select the face. Go into material properties here. After that, click on the plus sign here to add a material to the selected object. Double-click on the material name to name it. After that, from base color here, you can change the color. Change it to red. To preview the material, click on this button here. This enables viewport shading. Let's do the exact same for each distinctive color of the character. Here you want to add a separate material for the eyes, one for the stem, one for the leaves, and one for the worm. Having separate materials allows you to control the properties of each object separately. Next, we want to paint the eyes and the mouth. In order to be able to paint on them, first we need to UV unwrap them. Let me quickly explain what that means. A UV map is the flat representation of the surface of a 3D model, and it's used to easily apply 2D textures to a 3D object. The process of creating a UV map is called UV unwrapping. In order to unwrap our models here, we need to make UV seams. A seam tells Blender that when we unwrap, the faces on either side of the seam should not stick together in the UV map. So when unwrapping, the mesh is unwrapped at the edges that are marked as seams. To make unwrapping easier to understand, think of it like origami. Essentially, you're just flattening your 3D model down to a 2D representation of it. First, let me show you how to do the UVs for the eyes. Drag this top right corner here to open a new tab. From this button, choose the UV editor. Now press Tab and go into object mode. Select the eyes. Press Slash on your keyboard to isolate the selected object. Now press Tab and go into edit mode. Press 2 for edge selection. Hold down Shift and double-click to select these edge loops running down the middle of the eyes. After that, right-click and choose Mark Seam. What that will do now is it will separate each eyeball into a front and back UV island. So the UV islands will be separated at these edges that we marked as seams. Now let's unwrap. Press A to select all the faces on the eyeballs. Then press U and choose Unwrap. Now you can see the UV shells for the eyes on the right here. We have a front and back shell for each eye. By default, to be able to see your UV shells in Blender, you need to have all the faces selected in edit mode. I find that is a very annoying way to work, so I turn that off by clicking on this icon here to turn off sync selection. That way you can see all of the UV shells on the selected object in the UV editor and not just the faces that you have selected in edit mode. Okay, that's the eye UVs all done. Now press Lash again to exit isolation mode. Now let's UV the mouth. Here it's a bit easier because we don't have to do any UV seams because the plane is single-sided. So it's going to be easily unwrapped by Blender. Also, as a reminder here, for the mouth you need to have a separate material. Okay, let's unwrap. Select the mouth in object mode and then press Tab to go into edit mode. Select all the faces with A, then press U and choose unwrap. Here I'm just rotating the UVs so the top faces upwards. Nice, that's the UVs all done. Now we can paint on the eyes and the mouth. To get the UV editor out of the way, right-click between the two windows here and then choose Join Areas. After that, click to the right to merge the two areas. In order to paint on the model, we first need to attach an image texture to it. To do that, drag the timeline up here and then from this button, choose the shader editor. Select the eyeballs. Let's attach a texture to our material now. While in the shader editor, press Shift A and then in the search field, type image texture. Click on image texture to add it. After that, click on New. You want to make the width and the height of the texture 2048 by 2048 pixels. Name the texture from this top field here. Then click on the color box. Change it from black to white. After you're done, click OK. Now connect the color of the image texture to the base color of the principled shader like this. We also want to attach an image texture to the mouth material. To do that, in object mode, select the mouth plane. Like we did before, in the shader editor, press Shift A and choose image texture. Click on New and name the mouth texture. Leave the settings as they are and then click OK. Attach the base color of this image texture to the principled shader. Okay, now we have textures attached to the eyes and the mouth. Now we can paint. In object mode, select the eyes object. Then press Tab and go into texture paint mode. Press N to bring out the side menu. Here in the Tool tab, you can find all of your tool settings. Here on the left, you have all of the tools that you can use. If you don't have this here, press T to unhide that menu. Here you can select what active tool you're painting with. We'll be using the brush tool for now. Click on the brush and then from this wheel on the right here, you can select the active color. If you scroll down from here, you can turn on symmetry. That allows you to paint on the left and right side at the same time. Now if you click on the model, you can see that you can start painting. You can increase or decrease the size of your brush here by pressing F. I turn on my reference and I make sure that my brush size is as big as the pupil of the eyes on the reference. Then I paint the eyes in like this. After that, I turn off symmetry and choose a white color for the brush. I paint in the highlights on each eye as well. Nice, that's the eye texture all done. Next, let's do the mouth. Press Tab and go back into object mode. Select the mouth plane and then press Tab to go into texture paint mode. Choose black from the color wheel here. Press F to decrease the brush size. If I paint now, you can see how messy my line is. This is just because I'm painting with my mouse. To get a nicer line, you can turn on Stabilize Stroke from here. After that, you can paint in the smile easier. Nice, that's looking good. In a little bit, I'll show you how to make the mouth plane transparent. But first, let's save the image textures that we just made. To do that, open up a new tab again and open the UV editor. Then choose each texture from this drop down and then go to Image, Save As. That saves everything we painted so far into a file. Do that for both the eyes and mouth texture. It's very important to save each texture that you make. If for some reason you close your scene without saving, or let's say Blender crashes, you will lose all of your texturing progress, which is never good. So please remember to save your image textures before closing Blender. Okay, next up, let's make the mouth transparent. In order to make it transparent, we need to make an alpha map. An alpha map tells you which part of the model should be transparent and which part should be opaque. In an alpha map, the black means transparent and the white means opaque. I create an alpha map by inverting the diffuse texture that we did in Photoshop. So everything in black will be transparent and everything in white will be opaque. I've provided the mouth texture and the alpha map in the description in case you don't have a way to make this. Here you just want to drag and drop the alpha map into Blender. After this, plug in the color of the alpha map to the alpha of the mouth material like this. Then while in object mode with the mouth selected, go into material properties here. Scroll down and go into viewport display. Then from settings, change the blend mode from opaque to alpha clip. That allows for transparency in the material. Nice, as you can see, the mouth is now transparent. Now it's time for the final step, lighting and rendering. At the moment you have a point light in your scene which is there by default. This one here. Let's just move it to the back of the character. Select the light and press G to move it back. Click on this button here to enable the rendered view in the viewport. This way you can see what the lights are doing while you're adjusting them. After you're happy with the positioning, press Shift D to duplicate the light. Position it on the other side on the front here. You can increase the power of the light or change its color from this menu here. So in my scene here, I've done 3 lights in total, but everything here is up to your preference. What I've done is I've put a light to the right of the character on the front, one to the left, and one on the back as well. You don't have to use the exact number of lights or the values that I use, and you can just play around to see what you like. After you're done with your lights, we can move on to render settings. Go into render properties here. After that, go down here in color management. Make sure that the view transform is set to standard and not filmic. This way your render will be nice and vibrant. If you want a transparent background on your image, you can go down here into film. Then from here you can enable transparent. This way you can put whatever color background you want in any photo editing software. Now let's change the size of the image we want to render. Go into output properties here. From these boxes here you can set the size of the render. I set mine to 2048 by 2048 for a square image. Now let's set up our camera. We're going to open another window here with a 3D viewport in it. This way we can have the camera preview on one side and we can navigate around the character on the other side. To open a new window, drag the upper right corner here. Now let's set up a camera. Click in the right viewport and press Ctrl, Alt and numpad 0 to create a camera from view. That creates a camera from the current view in the viewport. After this, select the camera in the hierarchy on the right and go into Object Data Properties. Change the type of the camera from perspective to orthographic. Orthographic just gives you a nice frontal view of your character. If you don't want a front view of your character, you can leave the camera to perspective here. You can change the value here to zoom your camera in or out. And that is everything all set up now. You can now press F12 to render your image. Once it's done rendering, you can save it from Image, Save As. After you complete the tutorial, make sure to share the image and tag me and School of Motion in it. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you've learned something new from it and it's made Blender less intimidating for you. Stay tuned for future School of Motion videos where you can learn more about Blender. Thank you for watching. Until next time!